So if I was starting another company today, regardless of who I was starting with, regardless of how strong that relationship is, my best friend, my husband, whomever, I would put it in, I'd put it in fucking writing.
Welcome to Taking Care of Lady Business, where we get real about what it takes to succeed, whether it's in business, life, or both. I'm talking to game-changing and visionary women who've broken barriers, built empires, and redefined success on their own terms. They'll share their strategies, secrets, and the no BS advice you need to rise to the top. I'm your host, Jennifer Justice, also known as JJ. Let's get into it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Taking Care of Lady Business. I'm Jennifer Justice. Today, we have Maria Goy. She is a former Fortune 500 executive turned founder in the insurance technology space. So we're going to get into it because she's got some great tips for female founders and what to and also what not to do a situation. So let's get into it, Maria. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, JJ?
I'm good. I mean, I'm sure everyone's like, what insurance technology space? Tell me more.
Yeah, it's like I'm like the Chandler of our friends. Like, you do what? And everybody just like turns and tunes out. So yeah.
I mean, but you're such an interesting, fascinating lady, like what brought you there? What was it?
Yeah. Well, I started my career back in the day. This really dates myself back at Anderson Consulting, and really just found myself in the space of like loving technology and operations. And went to a myriad of different companies, kind of running the same sort of programs based around technology, from Starbucks corporate to Paramount Pictures, MTV, Kohl's Technology, and then ultimately landed at New York Life Insurance, and really just kind of fell in love with that, found it as my passion, the amount of data that we sat on for utilization, and really getting into an understanding of insurance and the benefits and how much of a need it is in this country, just given the way that we're run from a medical and life perspective. And the transition over the years of insurance really turning into vehicles for the have and have nots, right? And so just as an example, when I was at New York Life, I purchased a whole life policy. That policy required me to put $75,000 a year in, which at that time was no problem. But you start to look into that, right? And $75,000 is almost $20,000 more than the average American woman makes today.
Yeah.
And so really looking at that and understanding how does insurance impact the lives of individuals on a day-to-day basis when it comes to healthcare or long-term planning. And so, yeah, really found myself in this space of like a good sold business ratio of like feeling like I was doing something that was bigger than me, but also getting to tap into the pieces of business that I love on the technology and operations side of the house.
And so how long were you there doing that?
I was there at New York Life for about 2 years. Read a book called How Will You Measure Your Life by Clay Christensen. And I think I was probably going through, like a mid-30s crisis at that time of like, oh my gosh, this isn't about like necessarily a legacy that you're leaving, but like, am I doing something with my life that's like bigger than me? And I can work for a bunch of companies and support their bottom lines and ensure that their P&Ls are healthy. But am I actually doing something to caretake for the world and the people more broadly around me? And so from there, sort of concepted this business about spot insurance. And that was sort of my kickoff into the entrepreneur space with sort of this base foundation that I had fallen into loving.
And what exactly was that? And then what was that transition like? How long did it take you to concept and then like quit that job to do this purpose and passion,
Yeah, I would say concepting it came pretty quick. It was sort of parallel to this point in time where I had lost a good friend who had been a partner at Deloitte, and sort of reading this book, sitting in her funeral, and thinking about wow, life is so short, right? And it really kind of just was this like perfect trifecta of like wanting to feel like I was doing more. The quitting part took a longer time. I think I gave a 3 months notice just because I had commitments that I had made to my boss and sort of the broader programs that were running around me at New York Life. And I didn't want to fail and let those go. But from there, once I did leave, it was pretty quick from a concept perspective. Had found a really great co-founder who's one of my close friends. And Matt was a serial entrepreneur. So kind of for everything that I am, he isn't, and vice versa, very yin to yang. He is very, can tell a story, get you to pay $20 for your own shadow. And I'm more of the, like, let's think about the operations, the compliance, like how does actually something come together and work?
You just hit that. Like, how did you know that you needed that? So many people start businesses because they're like-minded and, then they start the business and like, wait, we both want to do this part. We don't want to do this other part. We're both good at it,
Yeah. I would say, I think it was just honestly like dumb luck or the universe, like conspiring to put something together, in sort of like the bigger scheme that I hadn't really planned for. But I think a lot of that had also come down to, I've done a lot of like self-awareness and reflection over, probably the last like 15, 20 years of my life, and knowing like what I'm good at, right? Like I'm not a salesperson, I think I'm charming enough to build relationships and work with individuals. But when it comes to telling these big stories and, talking about like this big vision of how it's like $1 billion, market space, like that's not me. I'm always going to be this, cautiously optimistic of like, well, this is the opportunity and, but here are the risks because that's just who I am. And so knowing Matt had, fundraised in the past and that was something that he was good at was more of an opportunity of like, hey, here's somebody that can do the things I can't, but I can also learn from along the way.
And, when you're doing this and figuring out step by step, like, knowing that you wanted to build purpose and passion, like, we're often so given this advice that's like, don't follow what you're good at, follow what you can make money in, Like, was that ever going through your head? Or was this like the book was just such a game changer that you were like forging?
It was never about the money, right? I say that in the sense of it became about the money when it came to making promises to our investors and showing this market opportunity, right? So in some ways, it kind of has to be about like the money when you're fundraising. But the passion for me was never about, getting this to a place where I'm going to have a private jet someday. This was about like, how can I more broadly make the world like a better place or help people plan for that next generation. So it wasn't to follow the money, because if it had been a follow the money, I should have stayed at New York Life for sure.
Right. Okay. So you start Spot, and tell us a little bit what it is exactly.
Yeah. So Spot Insurance, which is getspot.com, started out as a place to get short-term life insurance from 1 to 30 days, sort of in those moments that you need it most when it's top of mind, right? Insurance is typically purchased at these milestone events, right? When somebody passes, a marriage, the birth of a child, et cetera. And so really kind of looking at this is how do we think about it so it's embedded in sort of the everyday life, right? Because once you go through the application process, there's a pretty significant drop off because that moment where it resonated most, that feeling no longer exists. But I would say the customer acquisition cost was high and it was a challenge. And so we did some qual and quant studies across the board. And what we found is like this generation, and when I had started Spot, it was really about the millennials. This generation was very much focused on like living life really well, not actually planning for a life well lived. They were most worried about medical bills and what that would mean to them. They were worried about the zombie apocalypse. I think Walking Dead was like big at the time. Like the number of people that actually had go bags in their car was insane. And so like, people were worried about like the fears that they'd never gone to a baseball game because they were afraid they were going to get hit. So we really pivoted pretty quickly towards offering injury insurance, which is accident insurance, for short periods of time embedded at point of sale. So as an example, Icon or Altera Mountain Company, if you're a skier, has embedded spot at point of sale so that you're covered anytime you might get injured skiing on an Altera property. Right? And that sort of led to then, well, we'll offer a pass refund insurance. So if you buy your, past the year prior, you get pregnant, you can't use it anymore, you can get a refund on your pass. And then, we started to offer trip insurance as well. And so started to offer a variation of different insurances across the board. And then the most recent product they launched was CFAR, cancel for any reason.
And so you're going through this, you figure out what you're doing, and then you have to raise money. Are you in the room raising money?
Yeah, in the room raising money, I'd say I was lucky that Matt, especially in the early days, took a lot of the brunt of that, sort of that initial pitch. And then when it came into, okay, we need a subject matter expert to prove that, there's something behind the idea that this is a possibility, then Matt would bring me in to talk about what that might mean from like a technology perspective or an operations perspective, or why it was a gap in the insurance space. So I'd say it definitely was the vibe of, investors invest in the people out of the gate, especially in that seed round. It's not just the idea, right? You have to have the right combination of idea and people. And I know from a lot of our conversations with our investors, Matt and I were a really, powerful investing couple, right? In the way that we were able to kind of sell like the big vision with the practicality of like, here's how it's actually like delivered.
And had you done any research or talked to anybody about what this whole process would be like, getting investors and getting advice on who they should be and what that really means to you as a founder?
Not enough. I didn't do enough of that up at front. I would say that my boss at New York Life, and it's kind of Dave Castellani, I refer to him as my soul boss, had given me some guidance and advice as he had gone through the process prior to becoming sort of an insurance executive as well. And Dave's advice was, it's going to be different for everyone. You're going to experience it differently. And I would say one piece that I wish I had done was more research and interviewing more people, especially more women, right, on what it was like to invest, what questions you should be asking, et cetera.
So questions you're asking, but also, as you go in, right, you guys, presumably you and Matt did an agreement together, right?
Yeah, we did. But even like looking at what that was like, right? It was hard because out of the gate, I didn't know any better. And so it was this, we're going to split the business 50-50. And that became a challenge as well, because when it came to sort of decision making, right, it wasn't this clear cut, like, well, he's CEO at the time, right? So he makes this decision, but it was my idea and I know practically what's possible. And so I'd say we ran into some of those challenges in the early days of really not having an alignment out of, how do you deal with those types of situations out of the gate?
Right. And you guys, did you have your individual attorneys as well as a company attorney?
No. I really, really wish, and this is part of, we'll get into it, I'm sure, how I met you, I wish I would have had my own attorney, right? Not for anything that I would have said against Matt, but more how I would have negotiated for myself in the very beginnings of the business, against the board or any board member that would have eventually come on. And it's probably one of my biggest regrets. I've got, a number of things that I would have done differently, but from a personal, care about myself and my livelihood, it's one of the things that I wish I would have really had known was important. Even as a corporate executive, I never even recognized the need for that. So
yeah, I know. Trust me, I know. So just so everyone knows, Maria is a client of mine, and we went through this one ordeal because she's here now to talk about the fact that she's no longer at Spot, and the reason why we're talking about her having her own attorney is that, and the reason the Justice Department exists is because women need to be represented, and they should be represented by people who really understand who they are, which is mainly women. And, to understand that you're in a very unique position in business and that you're not surrounded by other women for the most part. You're underestimated and, your entire career. And, so it's really difficult when you're not really sure what to do and you're being given this advice by men, who feel comfortable. They're not really usually scared about being kicked out of their own company or being fired as much as we are.
Yeah, completely. Well, and especially in like today's geopolitical landscape, right? I mean, and the things that are happening more broadly, it's like I have a lot of anxiety around that. So if I was starting another company today, regardless of who I was starting with, regardless of how strong that relationship is, my best friend, my husband, whomever, I would put it in, I'd put it in fucking writing.
Yeah.
You have to look out for yourself as well, because to your point, I do think that we're often underestimated, we're underserved, and often that leads to, not necessarily malicious, but just being taken advantage of.
Exactly. Because so many times what happens is, when a woman like even gets a job in a corporate place or, as a founder, there's 50%, and let's take the corporate example. The companies basically think 50% of them are not going to negotiate their salary and rely on it. If they have 50% women, you know what I mean? And so they're taking that bet, whether or not they're doing consciously or not, they're taking the bet. And so often they're not. And where does that leave us? Like right where we started, And same with founders. It's like, feel like we can, this be, it's steamrolled over, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me about your whole process then. Let's go back a little now that we've told the end of the story a bit. Tell me, how long were you in Spot? Like what, how were things going in the beginning? How did you raise, how many rounds did you guys raise? Just give me a little bit of background there.
Yeah. So, initial days started out as COO. Matt was CEO. So kind of all things marketing, fundraising fell into his purview. And then everything else, operations, tech, product all fell under mine. As we started to hire the team, we did a friends and family, a seed, a series seed, and then a series A. So 4 rounds. And over that period of time of, 7 years, we had raised over 40 million. And then you throw on some venture debt as well. And so it was, I would say in the early days, right, it was quote unquote easy to raise, right? Everybody was kind of putting cash out. Now, when I say easy, you're still going through this process of, look, you're going to hear, 50 no's for every one yes. And so I lost count of the number of people that we actually pitched. But when you found investors that believed in you and were passionate also about the idea and space you were in, that was quote unquote the easy bit. And so really enjoyed that piece of it, especially getting to know VCs that were curious and inquisitive and passionate about the space or saw the opportunity. And it wasn't just like, oh, what do I think the multiple is going to be? But actually, can I see a bigger demographic, like Montage Venture with Todd Kimmel and his team were one of those VC firms that I always loved. MSNAD with John Soderberg was also another one, right? They saw the potential for the opportunity in the market, but they also saw the need for it in the market as well. And that was sort of like the magic.
And how long were you there total then?
I was there from 2017 to 2024.
That's a while.
Yeah. So quite some time, and was CEO for the last 2 years after we had closed our Series A round. Matt and I had moved into a sort of co-CEO position and then transitioned pretty quickly over to CEO.
And then when you're raising these money, you're meeting these people, you're like meeting some super interesting people, and then there's a board and you're all of a sudden reporting to these people that do they know about your business? Do they, are they seasoned in industry and insurance technology or?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So the way that our board ended up being comprised was folks that were not seasoned insurance individuals, probably more on like the tech and SaaS platform side of the house. We did have one board observer who was from Mutual of Omaha. She was the chief innovation officer at the time and had led their round of investment into us. And so Nikki sat on the board as an observer, but as an observer, right, it's silent. They're not really providing advice or guidance outside of, the great relationship I had with her and the things that she would bring forward. And so again, I think that was, as I think and reflect back on some of it, I really wish we would have had, at least one or two board members that were more seasoned in like the insurance space. Having folks that didn't understand the regulatory or the compliance factors that went into running the business. And it wasn't just about like, well, just run it until you get a complaint. Well, a complaint can actually lead to something pretty significant, like you losing your licenses, right? And insurance is a pretty small industry as well. So you lose your license, all of a sudden you can't distribute with a partner in a state or multiple states potentially, right? And it's about then your own personal reputation as an individual. So yeah, I would say it was definitely a challenge as I think about sort of that board makeup by the time that I left.
And who's giving you advice at this point on who should be on the board and who not, et cetera?
Really nobody. Again, it kind of came down to, Matt and I originally had this rule of like no assholes allowed. And, great, you can say that, but you don't really get to know people. And I wish I would have spent more time getting to know folks prior to and understanding sort of the why behind sort of the investment and the areas that, they would be in full support of and trying to understand maybe where some of their weaknesses were. I wish I would have interviewed the boards that they were on beforehand. I definitely didn't do enough of that.
Do you know why you didn't do it? Do you remember?
Didn't know. I just didn't know better. You're first time entrepreneur and all of a sudden you're like excited and opportunity is happening. And I came from a very corporate background and I just didn't have that entrepreneur mentor that would have, advised me to think about better, and how to evaluate board members better. I have an amazing group of like peers right now that I wish I would have had that advice, or I wish I would have had them in my network at that period of time, because I can guarantee you they would have told me all of the things that I should have watched out for.
Yeah. I mean, that's why it's so important, these like peer networking, kind of groups, like women's groups in particular, that you can reach out and be like, who else has like done this and on a board, and can I talk to you, and et cetera. Like sharing the information is more important than ever.
Totally.
So can we just get to the crux of the story, why you're not there anymore?
Yeah. So I had gotten pregnant, been trying for like 5 years, and my husband and I finally went through a round of IVF, got pregnant in 2023, ended up delivering in 2024, sort of running the company all through that time. And during that time, we started to see quite a bit of transition and sort of moving away from these products that I was more passionate about towards more sort of either non-admitted, which means a little less regulation, like CFAR products, and just other products like trip and pass insurance that I hadn't necessarily had a super passion about, right? That's not necessarily helping somebody's bottom line when they're paying their bills. And at that point in time as well, kind of working with the board, it just started not to feel healthy. Do you know what I mean? Like, there was just so much pushback, and, a board is meant there to support and, ask questions and enable, and how do we jump in and help, and who can we make introductions to? And, I think I had tried to swing the pendulum so far, because the relationship that my co-founder Matt had with the board was a bit contentious, one board member in particular. And so coming into the CEO position, I had to sit down with the two of them and said, this is my expectation. I think I just swung the pendulum on that like female empathy swing too far, right? And trying to want to make the board feel more involved, and that I'm like really transparent, and wasn't assertive enough, ultimately, kind of when it came down to it. And I don't know if it was malicious or not, right? You never want to think it is, but maybe it is. Like that there was just sort of, you see a little wrench and just you take an inch, you give an inch and you take a mile, right? And in one particular board member, it just started to feel really unhealthy and toxic, for lack of a better word. And, there was one situation in a board meeting where, a situation had just happened with somebody who had left the company, and he just like reamed into me, like wasn't listening to what I had said, and just totally berated me in front of the entire board. My team was actually in the meeting as well, as they were presenting some of their bits and pieces. And afterwards I had called and was like, that was highly inappropriate, and you can never speak to me like that again. Right. This apology of like, oh, it'll never happen again. There's just a lot of high emotion. Things are happening with our other portcos and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, this is honestly a toxic relationship. Somebody's gaslighting you and they're telling you they're sorry and it's never going to happen again. And then it happens again. Right. And it was just that constant situation. And, it was just a lack of support. And then all of a sudden I had found out that particular board member was like reaching out to members of my team asking, do you really believe in this idea? Do you think that Maria can pull off this new change? And almost trying to like establish a coup. And it's just like, did you really think that I wasn't going to find out about it? Right. And it finally came down to this point of, market was in a challenging position. Nobody wants to fundraise. Everybody's focusing on profitability. And I was asked to put together a plan to sort of strip the company down, which I just didn't believe in. And so I put it forward and just said, I genuinely don't believe in this plan, but this is what you want. This is what you want, right? And looking back on it, like that is not the role of a fucking board to tell you to strip the company down, right? Yeah. Especially with like absolutely no guidance or this like sit down, like let's talk through it. Like, and also because they weren't insurance folks, they don't understand the crux of the business of like you can get to a much smaller, team, but it takes time to wind functions down. It takes time from a compliance perspective to make sure those functions like transition. And I had already reduced our burn, right, by a significant amount and extended our runway by, 18 months. And so there's just this like complete lack of appreciation for that. And it just started again to feel like I'm being put in this like situation where I'm not feeling comfortable from like a regulatory or compliance perspective on the direction being pushed.
Why do you think, I find it so interesting. You're sitting there and getting screamed at in front of all these other people and no one stops it. No one says like, this is totally inappropriate. Like, calm down.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, no other board member came to my rescue or not that I need rescue. No other board member stood up and was like, this is inappropriate. And in the moment, right, I'm sitting there and I'm also like, 3 months out from having a baby, sitting in this board meeting. And you're in kind of this emotional state and shock that like somebody's actually doing this in public. You're already like, my hormones are raging and everything else. And you're just trying to hold it together and don't even know how to react in the moment.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But I think it's human nature, right? You take any psychology class and it's like, they tell you like the famous story of a woman's being attacked in the middle of this courtyard and, everybody in these like surrounding apartments, and nobody calls the police because everybody assumes somebody else is doing something.
Do
so I assume that nobody says anything because everybody's waiting for like somebody else to say something.
Somebody else to do something.
And this board member as well was the more established sort of gray hair board member. Our other board members were fairly young. But after that, it was very much we need to bring in an independent board member that has a lot more experience, that has gone through this and can be a much more voice of reason. And so I brought somebody onto the board after that. But at that point in time, it was just too little too late for me. Like that had just like been the seed of like, this is like a fucked up situation and it's not getting any better.
Right. But, ultimately, I mean, do you feel like, and nothing was happening to your co-founder, ma'am?
No. And there's no way I looking back on it and maybe they would have said something to Matt. I don't know. You can always guess, but you look at that and I don't know that they would have ever in in the 5 years prior with Matt running the board, like nobody had ever spoken to him that way. Right.
Right.
So yeah, I hate to say it, it's the gender piece, but like at some points, like walks like a duck and talks like a duck. It is a duck.
Right. A duck is a duck. Let's be real. And so, having gone to this experience, right? I like this podcast to be very tactical. It's like, well, what are the things that you would do differently?
I would have gone back when I had been asked to assume the CEO position. I would have renegotiated for myself. I would have brought on an attorney. I would have renegotiated my contract. I would have set firmer boundaries with the board. I would have tried less to be on the accommodating on where the gaps had been in the prior 5 years and focus more on sort of what needed to happen. I would have sat down with each board member individually and gone through, here's how I plan to run the company. This is my ask of you and what I need support on. And sort of establish that.
So do you feel like there was like some peer pressure internally even for the board because of this? Like, that's why you would do it individually?
I think I would have done it individually just to better understand the motivator for every board member, because every board member is there for a different reason, right? They came in at an investment at a different point in time, so their return is going to be different. I also would have wanted to understand like how they would have viewed the board dynamic and makeup and what they think they specifically were bringing to the board itself versus like the board as a whole. So that's why I would have done it individually. But then I would have reported out, right? Like, here's where we are. This is what I've aligned to. And Colin, this is what I'm expecting you to bring. Gautam, this is what I'm expecting you to bring based on the conversation. Kip, this is what you're bringing to the table, right? I would have had more of that alignment. And I would have pushed and advocated for myself more.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Hindsight 2020. Just for people who don't know, what stage in a company do you get a board?
It really depends, right? We brought a board on pretty early in the seed stage. We had two board members from our primary, our sort of lead investor. But I have friends that didn't start a board until they raised their Series A. So I think it depends on sort of the expertise and the ask, and then does the lead investor in an early stage want a board seat. But I'd also recommend in the future, like, don't bring on a board until you have to.
Right, because you could always have a board of advisors, right? You can give equity, and that have expertise, and they're not the same. 100%. Yes, which people don't really understand. There's two different kinds of boards. Board of advisor, come on. You give them a little equity. They're there every month. They help. They have connections, et cetera, et cetera. What an actual board tends to do, but they sit on it because they're big investors in the company for the most part. Yeah. Well, what I know is that so many people are going to be very thankful you told this. And the reason why Maria could tell this story is because we would not sign a release when she left the company. And so, and there's so many of these stories that don't get told because of those reasons. And I really appreciate it. And everything that you're still doing, because now you have a new job. You're good, right?
Yeah, and I guess the thing I would call out as well is like the application for self of like I was telling my husband this morning, he was, asking about the conversation with you. And I had said, like, it's nice to have a little bit of space away. Like when this first happened, it was like the anger, right? And this of like towards the end, like I was told like I should bring less emotion, right, to the table, which you would never say to a man, right? Like anytime Matt was necessarily like emotional, it was like, he was just like, really passionate about like the topic, but like literally being told you're emotional, like was happening to me being, there was also, it had come up like, questions of like, oh, so when you're stepping away, like you're going to be told it's because you want to step away and like raise your family. Right. And then that, as you know, was very much part of it. And so
Right.
I think the piece for me, as well as for women, especially as like more women are having children at a later stage, is like advocating for yourself through an attorney, but also knowing that like the end result for me wasn't about like any payout, right? Because, I walked away with fucking nothing, like zero, because the result was saying I have enough self-respect, especially in this like geopolitical environment, that the line they want me to toe is that I'm leaving to spend time with my family, which more power to women that do that. And that is their truth. But that was absolutely not my truth. I was leaving because I was no longer the right person to lead the company with that board. There just wasn't the chemistry. I was never going to be able to get over all of that.
Or you were pushed out because you were a woman and they wanted to have that narrative. Like
totally. And now it's a fully male board, right? Nobody with insurance experience on that board. So like, which is not true. They now have like an observer has great experience on the board, which is awesome. Right. And the current CEO is like a really wonderful man that I have a personal relationship with. So, I think all in all that has worked for Spot. But it really comes down to, know what's important to you, right? Advocate for yourself. Protect yourself, right? Like I had nothing that was agreed to from a severance perspective, right? Like, that's a big thing. You've just invested I've invested like 7 years of my life into this, and to walk away with nothing other than my equity, which, there was a big question of like, they wanted to be able to like have a caveat around that. And I would have to like, a non-disparage was only one way. So they could say anything about me, but I had to say that everything was wonderful. And yes, I was leaving because of my family, but again, not my truth. Like, so I'd say like, know your truth going into it. Right. And have somebody like JJ that can help you put that truth on paper.
And look, I'm going to point out, it's like, obviously super accomplished, strong, very smart woman. That doesn't mean that like, how to do every single thing and protect yourself. We're also taught not to do those things. Right. It's like, it's ingrained in us from a very early age. It's like, and so, you can only imagine in any given level of, job or your career, like not understanding these things. That's fine. Okay. But now once you hear it, now go and make sure you're protected, right? Make sure that when in your own company, you need an employment agreement, and that employment agreement needs to say that if you fire me, board, or something happens, and you can get fired from your own company. Another reason why I have this, like, you can get fired from your own company. So protect yourself when that happens. You have to make sure that contracts, like lawyers, we're only there for the worst possible scenario. That's what we do. Like never, if everything's going great, you never look at the contracts, right? Totally. It's only when shit goes down,
Totally. And you never want to assume that the worst can happen, especially when it's your own company. Or like that will never happen. But you kind of have to assume that, right? Of like the worst case scenario. And like, so what? You spend a little bit of money up front to put something in place, and it's the best thing for you. Right? Yeah. It's the best thing for your livelihood, for your family, especially when you're putting so much into something that you don't know what the outcome's going to be.
Yeah. I mean, thank you. And thank you for sharing the story, because, it's a lot, and it's like, that you put a lot into that, and it's sad and emotional and scary. And yes, it's emotional. Okay. And that's also passion. Steve Jobs used to cry in all meetings, but he was passionate, not emotional.
Yeah, exactly.
Give me a fucking break. And it is emotional because it's your fucking child. Okay. Like, you built this thing. Like, come on. Anyway, thank you so much for all of that. I also want, I do ask one question at the end of every podcast, and that is, but I don't know with this, but it's like, what's the worst advice you've ever received?
Oh my gosh. The worst advice I've ever received is, don't worry about it. It's just going to work out.
Right. Yeah.
It just goes counter to what we just said. Is like, you should worry about it. Yeah. Like, you should always have a backup plan.
Always.
Like, especially when starting your own business, like just assuming it's going to work out because your partner says so, or, a board member tells you, like, they're going to take care of you. Like, No.
Yeah.
Worry about it. Yeah. Spend the 5 minutes to worry about it.
Yeah. I love it. I thought you were going to say to sign the release. But
well, thankfully, I had an amazing attorney that told me, like, I can't sign that
I never
release.
said that, but yeah. Maria, thank you so much for this. I so appreciate your time and, everything, and telling your truth and speaking your truth, because it really is helpful when people really do that. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And to everyone listening to this episode of Taking Care of Lady Business, until next time, I'm Jennifer Justice. Thanks to MedJet for supporting the Lady Business podcast. If you're hospitalized or your security is threatened while traveling, they can get you home. I'm a MedJet member and have been for years. Everyone who travels should be. Enroll before your next trip at medjet.com. Thanks for tuning in to Taking Care of Lady Business. Don't forget to like, subscribe, rate, and review. And also share this episode with a friend who needs that extra push to own their success. If you want more strategy stories and exclusive content, follow us on TikTok at Taking Care of Lady Business, on Instagram at thejustice.dept and Jennifer Justice L, or visit our website at thejusticedept.com. Taking Care of Lady Business is a production of Lady Business LLC.